And welcome back to the Dave LewAllen Podcast. We certainly appreciate you joining, watching, listening to these podcasts. We cover sports stories, newsmakers, and difference makers in our communities and across the state of Michigan. I'm pleased to have with me today in studio Todd Flood, the managing partner of Flood Law, with offices in Detroit and Oakland County as well. Former prosecutor, assistant prosecutor in Wayne County, in private practice since 2002. And pleased to have Todd here today to talk about his career, certainly, but also cases in the news today and some of his previous involvement with a very high-profile case, the Flint Water Crisis, where he was a special prosecutor in that case for a period of time. Todd, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you, Dave.
It is great to see you and great to share some of your story, and we'll get into some of the background,
Sure.
What led you to where you are today. But because of the interest in the Oxford shooting case, Ethan Crumbley, the young man who shot the four students, killed the four students and injured others as well. The trials that have gone on with him, but with his mother, and the upcoming trial involving his father.
Right.
It is sad. It is tragic. It is so many things on so many levels.
It is.
When you have something like this occur, it's just tough all the way around.
It is. It's an ugly situation. I think the biggest takeaway in this world for which we live in, if you study these cases that you have mass shootings at, there's always this common denominator of mental health that comes into the equation, and the study of mental health, and what do we do about that, and how is it seems as though we're remedial in our country, right, to deal with that. Yeah, I mean, compare it to landing or taking and flying a plane, right? We haven't had a catastrophe since 2002 to present of a major plane going down. You got to take off in the snow, the ice, the wind. You got to do 1,000,001 things to get this big, ginormous plane down, and they do it successfully time after time after time. And they have these checklists, and they go through them. So when you think about, we can do that, right? But we can't spot, or we can't treat, or we can't deal with the mental health aspect. Ever since we closed down, in Lafayette, down in Detroit, we let out in Michigan a lot of people that needed to be taken care of or put into treatment.
And in Northville, too.
Yeah, right? So it's a sad state of affairs when we're not recognizing that issue which plagues us. I think this could have been prevented on so many different levels. Everyone's asking that proverbial question: do parents have to be worried now? Could they be charged? We have cases in the state of Michigan. This is not unusual to prosecute a parent for gross negligence. This is the first time there's been a mass shooting.
Right.
But it's not the first time that a parent left a gun out and a child shot another child and the parent was charged.
Well,
right?
Sadly, it happens, we've covered it in Detroit numerous times where guns are, left out and with kids in the home, in some cases, home alone.
Right. The CDC just came out with, when they passed the new bill that just came out on Tuesday, I think it was 1,200 children killed, just over 1,200, from shooting between the ages of 2 and 17. Think about that, 1,200 plus for guns that were left in reckless areas, to the extent, how easy is that to prevent? So we have cases where parents have been charged in the state of Michigan that have gone up to the Court of Appeals. I used it actually in Flint as a precedent, where a parent was put on notice that their child was basically a pyro, lighting things all the time. Child Protective Services comes in and says, you got to watch your daughter. She cannot have any kind of matches or lighters or anything like that around the house. Mom falls asleep on the couch. She puts her cigarettes and matches on top of the refrigerator. The child gets up on the counter, jumps up onto the fridge, takes the matches and the lighter, goes into the bedroom, lights a curtain on fire. The curtain then catches the apartment complex on fire. A baby downstairs dies. Mother was charged with involuntary manslaughter. She was convicted. She was given notice. What did she do? She didn't secure, and it was upheld in the Court of Appeals. So it's gross negligence. Is it reasonably foreseeable that something bad could happen? And the answer to that is yes. You have a gun. If you do, you need to, make sure you take care of that deadly weapon and secure it properly. It's that simple.
In this case, the mass shooting, Jennifer Crumbley, charged 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, was convicted.
Right.
Her husband, James Crumbley, his trial, I believe, is set to begin March 5th.
5th.
He's charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter as well. The precedence of it as it relates to a school shooting or a mass shooting. I've heard some legal opinions, people commenting saying, "Ooh, this is bad, or this is dangerous, or this is potentially, a road that could lead to all kinds of, different."
Slippery slope. Right.
Do you agree with that?
I don't. As long as you have facts, and I teach this, right? Cases are based on facts. Give me the facts. If you don't have the facts to support the law, then it should never be charged. Never. And that's the type of situation here. I mean, do the facts ferret out whether or not there's culpability based on those facts that violate a statute? And in this particular case, not only was there probable cause established, that preliminary exam, down in district court, got appealed to the circuit court. Circuit court upheld it, right? That got appealed to the Court of Appeals, Michigan Court of Appeals, and it was a conservative bench. It wasn't a liberal bench. It was a conservative bench in the Court of Appeals that looked at that case, the Crumbley case, and found that it was reasonably foreseeable and that the parents did have a duty, right? And they breached that duty. And when they breached that duty, there was enough to show that, hey, listen, they didn't give an ordinary care. Ordinary care. Think about it. If you and I, parents, right, and we go into the principal's office. Now, we didn't get called. I didn't get called ever with one of my kids, knock on wood, to the principal's office. But if I did, and you did, and you saw that drawing that he put in front of you, right?
Should be alarming.
Alarming times 10.
Yeah.
And then to note, you and your wife bought your son a gun.
Yeah.
And the gun looks like the picture. I mean, you're going to hold the thing. You're going to put it in your hands. You're going to look at it. You're not going to push it to the side. You're going to look at that, and you're going to say, oh, boy, that gun, these people shot, blood everywhere. The thoughts don't stop.
Right.
And then you get a counselor saying, hey, by the way, you need to get him in to treatment. Do you leave?
No.
Do you leave? No. Come with me for a second, son. Let me put my arms around you.
Yeah.
Let me put my arms. I mean, it kind of starts at home. We could talk about that for ad nauseum, but the question I think parents have on their plate, no, this is not a slippery slope. It's a serious case, an anomaly, I think, because parents, this has happened to often, and they're not charged because the facts didn't bore out those circumstances. In this particular case, I believe the facts did because they were derelict. It wasn't a mistake. She left the gun in the car.
Yeah.
The jury, 4-person, said, who was the last adult, right?
Yeah.
And
so you weren't surprised then with
no. I think the
guilty
father,
verdicts.
right? No, I wasn't. I think the father may have a better defense, may have a different roadmap to cover because it was the mom that had control of the gun at the time. I also think there's something that bothers me, and I don't have an answer for it. I'm always looking for the truth, right? So here, if you remember the shooter's, when he was sentenced, not his plea, but when he was sentenced, he gave an allocution. He gave a statement to the court. And one of the things, if you play that back, he said, "My parents didn't know. They would never know," right? That bothers me, right? Because he's saying that, well, obviously they were derelict in their duty. But why does he say that? Why does he say that? I was always, we may never know.
Just to protect them?
Yeah, possibly.
In
right?
some way?
Possibly. Maybe there's a remorse there. But his pathology is very scary.
Yeah.
Think about, if you watch and study serial rapists, serial killers, serial anything, habitual patterns. He starts doing some really demonic things early on in life, from killing birds and some ugly stuff. So his pathology is one that I think he was on a trajectory for some bad things.
And it seems as though if, again, you're a parent and you're in tune and aware and paying attention, if some of these things have happened, seems like a light bulb ought to go on even earlier.
Reasonable person would think that, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think there's, I watched some of the trial. But I read. I have times where I don't sleep, so I read, and I read a lot of the testimony. And I have noticed, I think there was at least 5 times that the school counselor, Hopkins, was put on notice that this shooter had some serious issues, especially the day before, right?
Yeah.
The bullets, and the things. And I have trouble with that because, I came from a family of school teachers, right? And I can't imagine not stepping into that young man's life as a school teacher or a counselor, because teachers were giving notice to the counselor. There was a lot of communication going to this place, and I don't fault them because they were attempting to raise the flag. I guess, how many red lights do you have to go through before something bad happens? Because there's a lot of red lights here.
Yeah. All right, so you say the husband, James Crumbley, you think maybe a different path for him. Originally, the two were going to have a joint defense.
Right.
And there was a separation. Apparently, a dispute between the two of them would lead to that. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, so I will tell you, legal experts, people that try cases and have joint defense agreements or individuals on the same case, everybody saw this coming. I don't know how this wasn't recognized earlier, but this is not a team sport, right? You represent your client, the individual client. And, there was definitely going to be, at one point in time, there had to be finger pointing. So it was not a surprise at all that they would have separate trials. Unfortunately, in Wayne County and other counties, we would have impaneled 2 juries at the same time, and the juries would have heard the case at the same time. Evidence against one necessarily, you would excuse that jury, so it didn't taint them, right? If there was confessions or statements, whatever the case may be. But that didn't happen here. So now that brings up other issues. But yes, Dave, the fact of the matter is, it was a no-brainer from the standpoint that there was going to be separate trials because fingers were going to be pointed, right?
Yeah.
What is possibly more disturbing is there some sort of an appeal issue here? Because, if I represented you and your wife was in the room and now all of a sudden I get your wife's secrets, right? Because she now starts to tell me things, right? And we're all in this together, right? So now I get separate trials. I no longer have anything to do with your wife in a joint defense agreement, none of that, but I now have her information which may inure to my benefit for your defense. And those are all interesting issues that I think will be dived into later on.
Yeah, and appeals would not be surprising. I mean, when you're
Guaranteed.
looking at the alternative of going away to prison for 15 or 15 times 4 years. I mean,
It won't be consecutive.
It won't be.
No, it'll be a concurrent sentence. The guidelines, I think, the top end will be right around 5 years. But because there's, so it'll be really simple, if the guidelines and the judge doesn't have to follow the guidelines. They're advisory now in the state of Michigan. But if the judge wanted to, the judge could say, I'm going to sentence you at the top end of the guidelines to 15. So if it's 57 months, whatever it may be, that would be 5 to 15. So we have truth in sentencing in Michigan, so she would have to serve that base minimum of 57 months, let's say. That's the top end. She would come up for a review and parole at that time. So she's already got 2 years in.
Yeah.
So she's looking at potentially 3 years before she could do it. But the judge could say, hey, listen, I'm going over the guidelines, that's advisory, and here's my substantial and compelling reason. That's the buzz phrase. What's the substantial and compelling reason for me to do that? And 4 deaths, right? So she could do 2/3 the max. So 2/3, is 10.
Yeah.
So it could be 10 to 15. I can promise you, as the day is long, there's going to be appeals. That's a no-brainer, right? That's going to happen. So, and I think there's some issues, but whether or not, the evidence to me was overwhelming, but we'll see.
Is 3 years, or if it's 10 years, whatever the case, is that the closure that the parents, that the fellow students, the community, is that enough?
Yeah, so you bring up a big question that, I've tried hundreds of cases. So
You're looking for justice for
there's
your
no
client.
There's no
but-
justice here. There's mercy,
Yeah.
right, on behalf of the victims, potentially, right? But when you lose a loved one, there's no justice to that. There's no dollar amount that you can give. I mean, read a great book about the facilitator that did 9/11 and had to give the money to the families, right, that lost their loved ones. And there's no justice in that. There might be a modicum of mercy, but to me, it is somewhat cathartic, because what happens is accountability and closure and healing, right? You got it, mental health and mourning and going through that mourning process, or just trying to get some closure so you can start to heal as a victim is so insanely important. And the court system can help with that. Yeah. It can also hurt, right? When you're so engrossed in it and there's a not guilty verdict, right? Then what does that bring, right? So I have found that in most cases, my mentor used to call it the Valley of Tears, right? It was the Valley of Tears because there's no dry eyes here. Someone's losing a son or a mother or whatever the case may be. Someone has lost their child, and there's no happy scenario, right? So I have worked with counselors and therapists on this with clients, and it is a part in the process of trying to get through to a stage of mourning to get you to the next level. But I really don't consider it anything but mercy. It's really not justice, because we'd all want to turn back the hands of time.
Yeah. Accountability for school administrators. You mentioned the counselors in particular.
Yep.
Maybe there are civil lawsuits still. I'm not sure if there are in that case. Does that provide some sense of accountability, or what needs to change within, say, a school, so that if things aren't happening that should in terms of identification and or action in cases similar to this, how does that change so some of those red flags or red lights are acted upon?
Right. So with all full disclosure, I'm part of the civil case. One of my clients was shot, not killed, severely wounded, but alive and going through the process. So, I won't discuss the particulars of, but I will address the bigger question that you asked, and I think it's a great question, right? Because in the world we live in, there are great teachers, great counselors, great principals, great assistant principals. And I know them. I know those people. I mean, one of my best friends, is down in Allen Park where I grew up, still vice principal down there. There's great teachers and the like. Unfortunately, we don't pay them enough,
Yeah,
I
right.
think.
For sure. I'm married to one, too.
Yeah. I think they deserve more, times 10, and more resources. But in every profession, I don't care if it's in Catholicism or it's in police or it's in medical, in every profession we walk in, there are going to be situations where we find people that, either don't care, don't have that passion to do what they're doing, don't have common sense for that position they're in, and that is, I would say, more rare than it's more the exception than the rule. But it's something that we all have to recognize, and it gets back to the fact that we have our prized possessions in these schools. Yeah. We have our legacy, our future of this country in these schools, right? And I think if you want to make everything great, you want to make everything, possible for the dreams to come true, you have to throw it into that place. And you have to make it so it's a safe environment, one, an educational environment, two, and then, your extracurricular activities. My father would always say, you're a student always first. Yeah. You can play sports, you're a student first, right? So throw the resources into the proper training, the proper counseling, and ferret out the ones that don't belong. Yeah. Doesn't mean they're bad people, it means that they don't belong in that spot, right? And I think there were some breakdowns, not only in this case, but I've studied other cases around the country to try to figure out is there a common denominator? And the common denominator I often see is the mental issue, the mental health issue and the crisis, and not being able to recognize that. Right. So,
or not recognizing it and then acting on it.
Right.
So, that whole mental health piece and the work that you do, you must encounter this all the time with people that you represent or cases that you're involved with.
Yeah.
What do we do about it?
So, it's funny because my better half is actually working on that issue and kind of dive deep into what we have going on in Michigan, and I think you'll probably see something about that coming up sometime. But the mental health crisis here, if you go to the emergency room, you're checked in and checked out. It's really very difficult. Oftentimes, you'll have a psychiatrist or a doctor that's on call that will have someone, do a diagnosis, and that is where bad things can happen because you can be put into an inpatient treatment where inpatient's not necessarily the right thing. So when I said remedial, oftentimes we don't address the problem until it's too late, right? We go to the doctor when we're sick. We don't go to the doctor to prevent the sickness. Yeah. So I call that remedial, right? So what do? We have to have this is always, I can hear the mics dropping all over the place. We have to be able to have a place and a resource for the proper training, both in the school, educational level, all the way through. And I'll tell you where I represent a lot of police officers. I really, my heart goes out to them because they're first responders. And I find post-traumatic stress disorder in a great majority of the guys that fight, for justice and taking care of our society on the street. And that therein, to me, is where we need to also address it. is within our first responders and people that deal with those crises on a day-in, day basis. So day-in, day-out basis. So my thought is that we have to have the ability to recognize it and the avenues to go for people that need it before it becomes a crisis. I think Governor Engler, and I think if he had a redo, I think if he could say, let me press the redo button, right. I think Governor Engler would have changed his decision on
closing
those facilities. I don't know that to be certain. Governor Engler is an honest man. He was a businessman. He made a lot of great changes in the state of Michigan, but that is one major faux pas to me.
That we're feeling to this day.
To this day. Yeah. And you will see it in other areas, and it'll come up with the question of Flint and lead poisoning later on.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Flood Law, your firm, again, because of your background as a prosecutor,
right.
You're involved in criminal law, civil litigation, wrongful death, personal injury.
Right.
How did you go from being assistant prosecutor to deciding it was time, to go off on your own, working with other prosecutors, right, to form
right.
the firm
right.
to do the work that you're doing today?
So that's a big question. I never envisioned myself when I started leaving the prosecutor's office. I was either going to go to the U.S. Attorney's office or always stay at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And I had some great conversations with mentors and the like. And Gerald Evelyn, one of the greatest attorneys around, kind of sat me down, pulled me aside, and said that my talents and my ability, when I questioned things about where my trajectory and where my path was going, he said, you would be a person to fight. I don't tell this to everybody, he says, and I love Gerald, but
yep.
He would said, you're the person that the city, that the county, that the state needs to fight for, against Goliath, and for justice on a different side. And we talked about it, and I talked to my other mentor, Augie Hudding, Augustus, Augie Doggy, and he's probably had more murder trials than anyone in the state of Michigan at the time. May he rest in peace. But he too said and gave me great counsel about switching to go to the private side. And then when I did go to the private side, my eyes were opened to so many things that I thought were worth going and fighting for. A violation of constitutional rights, even when you have someone that may be guilty of a crime, but there was...
Rights were still trampled upon.
Yeah, So I saw, the light, started coming through and seeing certain cases. And then when the civil cases came, what I found is that the fact of the matter is that's where you get a catastrophe. You get, someone that got killed or someone that died in a prison and it was tried to have a cover-up. We've had several of those cases. Or someone was falsely accused, put in prison because material was hidden on the person. Yeah. If we looked at, and I don't want to get into stats, but if we looked at how many people that are put in prison wrongfully, yeah. It's a staggering number, right? So, those causes, or someone is discriminated against. In the prosecutor's office, I was one of the few that did a couple cases in front of Judge Crockett on ethnic intimidation, where, minorities were being intimidated in the housing for where they lived, where nooses, and I prosecuted that person. Well, when I saw that going on in the employment area, where there was discrimination mm-hmm. based on sex or race or the like, those were passions that I could bite into. And then it, flourished. I was the lead counsel with the 43 people that were raped over at EMU. I worked on the Nassar case and on the Dr. Anderson case, but Those things to me, when you connect and you care, and that became a real big passion for me.
Yeah. Let's get to Flint.
Yeah.
Bill Schuette brought you on as special prosecutor in the Flint Water Crisis. We talk about, tragic with and sad with the Crumbley case, certainly, and the Oxford shooting. Another case, impacting, a city, a largely minority city, Flint, gone through all kinds of problems. And then this decision is made to switch, from Detroit water to Flint River water, which led to really a catastrophe for residents of the city of Flint. You were brought in. You didn't finish the case, but you were, there trying to prosecute that case, and again, hold people accountable for mistakes, for decisions that were made that harmed residents of the city of Flint.
Right. So, the word, Judge Small probably cringes when people say mistake. She's a friend. She's over in Bloomfield, and she'll say, hey, listen, 2 times 6 divided by the square root of pi times 8 equals, and get 10 seconds, you make that's a mistake if you get the wrong answer, right? If you said 2 + 2 is 5, that's not a mistake. That's just a decision that you make. So there were so many bad decisions here. And, in the big scheme of things, it hurts because I lived there for 3 years, right? And it was an honor to serve the people of Flint and the state of Michigan, to go back and do that. And the fact of the matter is, follow the money. In this case, it is an ugly, ugly tragedy. You can't make it up. It should never happen anywhere in America. Over 140 people died. I don't think people understand how many people died in Flint from this catastrophe. And if you look at it, it's really quite simple. The Flint Water Treatment Plant was not prepared to serve Flint in making potable water. There was no ifs and buts about it. It hadn't been used. The only thing that was used was Detroit would fill the water stations, those big water stations, and if there was a crisis of a day or 2 or 3 out, you would just pump down the water from the water stations through the Flint plant to the homes. But the Flint River hadn't been used to serve potable water. That hadn't happened. So anyone that says that it was is a lie. But what you take place is the alarms went off. The alarm went off that, hey, listen, my water treatment plant in Flint guy says, over my dead body, I'm not turning this thing on. Can't turn this on, right? All right, so, well, fine. He gets hushed, right? $125 million was basically allowed to be taken from a financial institution, JP, right, to the city of Flint to pay the KWA. They were ponying up the money. They were ponying up the money because the city of Flint couldn't borrow money. They were under an EM. Right. They attempted, right? And the treasurer at the time, Mr. Dillon, said, nope, can't give you guys money. You're under this. Well, okay, so what do? They create, classic move, they create a lime sludge lagoon problem. A lime sludge lagoon, it was like a circle, and lime allegedly was being pumped over from the Flint Water Treatment Plant, and it polluted this lagoon. And they said, okay, we are going to create a contract for the city to borrow money to fix the lime sludge lagoon. It cost about maybe, good guesstimate, $100,000 to fix. They got $125 million. So they took that $125 million, they gave it to the KWA. KWA then starts their pipe process coming in, and the city of Flint sold their connecting pipe to the Detroit aspect to the KWA. In that agreement I was telling you about, and I know I'm getting into the weeds, but in that agreement they were talking about, for you to get the $125 million, you know what you have to do? You have to use the city of Flint water treatment plant, right? So they were caught over a barrel. Yeah. So they sell everything, give their soul, everything, all over to the KWA. And what the byproduct of that was, they didn't have a plant that could properly treat the pipes in the city of Flint. So if you can imagine, Dave, for a moment, you're in an area where two things are going to happen. You don't put orthophosphate, that's this chemical that coats the pipes, and you don't put it in that water. So next thing you know, you got active water and things are coming down from the pipes, right?
Yep.
And there was a seal there, and that seal was Legionella, right? And then the copper. 2 seconds. The copper came down, copper and lead came down, and the Legionella came down. They would dump chlorine into the water, trying to kill everything. Let's get the chlorine in there.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was chlorine mixed with the organic material, and that became a trihalomethane, TTHM. What is that? Let's just say it's steroids, right? It's food. It's food. So as the water went down the pipe, the food then fed the amoebas of Legionella, and they became these big plumes. And if you lived in Flint and you were down the pipeline, you had an invasion into your home of lead and Legionella.
That you had no idea was happening.
No idea. No clue. And so if you were diabetic, or if you had ailments or comorbidities, and you had these things and you're living life trying to, make the best of it, and you got Legionella, you were dead.
Yeah.
So my mom, who just passed away, but if my mom, 94, was up there with Parkinson's or others, right?
Yep.
And she caught that at the age of 90, 89, she'd be dead well before those years that we had her. So that to me, right, it's not rocket science. This was really simple. It only became easy after you did all that work, right? But it's the biggest tragedy, and I'm so saddened because you talk about justice. There's no mercy there, right? I buried a friend there. I became friends with a lot of people there. And, I was with the mother when she pulled the plug on her daughter because the daughter had other ailments that were taking place. And we cried together. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Yeah. That'll be an indelible imprint in my brain for as long as I live. And, Dana Nessel and her crew, I'm not going to throw stones there. It's not appropriate. It's not what I would do.
But we should say that you were in that role, appointed by Bill Schuette, Republican,
right.
Change of administration.
Right.
Dana Nessel becomes the Attorney General. She wants her own people. You're out, they're in. Bottom line is ultimately cases were dismissed.
Yep.
There were no charges, that resulted in convictions. No accountability.
Right.
How many millions and millions of dollars were spent on a case that resulted in no accountability whatsoever?
Yeah. No, I don't know, and it pains to think about. Right.
Yeah.
I will say this, and I am a big fan of Kim Worthy, and I like Fadwa Hamoud. We became friends. That was not, how this all designed. I don't even think they would have ever done this the way they did it, having me out. But regardless of all of that, we had proven our case for the first time in the country of involuntary manslaughter against the director of the MDHHS and the doctor for the state of Michigan. First time ever, a cabinet person's, because we showed that they knew, that they had a duty, they failed in their duty. So by analogy, I told the judge, hey, listen, if I was a weatherman, Judge, and I have a duty to tell Hawaii that a storm is coming, and I look at it, it's on the Doppler Center, and all of a sudden I see it, and it's my job, my duty to tell all these people, these innocent citizens, that this hurricane's coming. I said, no, I'm going to have a cigarette now and go to bed. No, I'm not telling them. right? And everyone dies,
Yeah.
right? I breached my duty, but for that breach, right? And was I a cause, right? So we showed that at a preliminary exam stage. It got bound over, and we were getting ready to go to trial. And here's the other thing. We worked a great team. It wasn't me. It was a great team. It wasn't even close to me. We had so many great people. I mean, we had some of the federal prosecutors that retired that had taken down the mob on our case. We just had such good investigators team that I was really honored to work with. So from that standpoint, we were all saddened that we didn't get the chance of all of us coming together to see at least get due process.
Yeah, and sad for residents of Flint who, again, ultimately are the big losers in this.
Yeah.
Your background, where did the interest in law come? The passion that you have, first, again, in the prosecutor's office, but now running your own firm and the work that you do. I wanted to do journalism from the time I was very young.
Yeah.
Knew what I wanted to do. How soon did you know, and how did you discover your passion for the work that you do up to this day?
So I will tell you, growing up, I had an amazing family. My brothers loved them. My oldest brother passed, but all of them, we were very close-knit. We played sports constantly. I still get my brother Paul, who graduated a few years before me, sending me YouTubes of his video on the football field over at, in Elk Park High. And I wanted to be a football player. That was my dream, that's where I came. I was a very competitive freak. But God did not grant me the DNA to do that. Gave me some heart and gave me the brains, but didn't give me the DNA. So, but I was always the guy that was wanting to ask why, question why in school and the like. And two of my teachers, Miss Ferenczi, she taught English. I don't know if I could, I always bragged in 9th grade they taught me how to make a chair. In 10th grade they taught me how to sit down in it. Miss Ferenczi, she was an English teacher, basically from Oxford, and she took me, and I was, I was her project, and she got me, so we read Macbeth and Hamlet, and then she was an amazing teacher in high school, and Mr. Haboyan, who taught law in high school. Both of them came together and said, Flood, you're probably not going to make it to the pros, right? But we want you to go to a couple programs, and got me into law enforcement type things and wanted me to go to college. And it sparked my interest because I was fighting what I believed for at that time, going on in life to fight for justice. So it was early on. It was early on in my high school career where two teachers kind of pulled me aside and said, "You're going to be a lawyer someday." And
the impact those teachers, and again, your parents were teachers.
Yeah.
And we all have had at one time or another that special or those special teachers in our lives who have taken an interest in us, who have helped us kind of find our way maybe,
right.
or identify
right.
Those characteristics that will allow you to be successful.
Yeah.
And they don't get enough praise. They don't get enough,
They don't. In my book, they don't. And football, because don't tell me I can't. If you say I can't, I'm going to go over beyond. I will run on the treadmill until someone can't run on it to win.
Yeah.
Right? That's just my makeup, and so that sports and the passion of team connected to the team of working for the prosecutor's office and law enforcement, and that was what launched my career.
And you said those lessons from sports, football, and the wrestling that you also participated in, you say those have benefited you throughout your life. Why?
Never quit. Never quit. no matter how hard you're working, no matter how hard the drive is, you're changing the trajectory of someone's life, right? You're not, curing a acne here. You're making a difference in a person's life to either they're going to go off and succeed and have a second chance, right? Or they're going to have the mercy of money to be able to pay for, to make them whole. But you're fighting for another human. And that to me, and society, but that to me is where, I still have my passion. So why you say those sports taught me never quit, no matter how hard the grind was, and no matter sacrifice for your fellow players, right? And, I was watching, obviously, we were talking about the Lions, and I was talking about David Montgomery. So you see, Goff throw the ball, St. Brown gets the ball. It's unbelievable. It's a great pass. It's a great catch. But no one saw the block, right, that the running back did on the blitzing linebacker that just sacrificed his whole body to make that happen, right? So those things to me, those sacrifices and those is what has been instilled in my brain from a very early on, and good enough is just not good enough. So that's where it comes from.
So often in television, when I'd meet people, they would say, are you nervous, every time that you get ready to go on the air? And it's like, there's anticipation, maybe not nervousness, and the more prepared you are, it really helps with any of the nervousness plus experience, right? So in court, does that transfer to your work in the courtroom as well? The more prepared you are, the more experience you have, the less nervous you are, if you will, when you're presenting or appearing before a judge?
So it's funny. So preparation. You got to prepare. That was Rich Kirsunis' lessons out of UAD law school to us. I took one of the classes for trial. Preparation. Got to prepare, right? But when you play sports, when you played football, and I still remember, and I see it, and I asked the pros today, you get nervous before you get? Yeah, of course, you got the butterflies, that's normal, right? It's a good stress. But the first hit, they go away, right? The first hit, you're in the game. You're there, right? So, and, I go to the bathroom every time before a trial, before a case, So, once I get in and I get going,
you're into it.
I'm into it. My preparation takes over. My flow takes over, right? I get into the if you're prepared and you're competent, and you know the rules, everything, you know how to do the case, you know how to try the case, you know how to work the case, and that's all preparation. So when you don't have some good stress, some good nervousness prior to going into it, I think it's almost. Someone once told me that's a time to hang up the spikes in the courtroom, right? Yeah. Because you're missing something there.
So people have issues. They need attorneys. They reach out to Todd Flood and Flood Law. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. So we get a lot of our cases based on referrals. A lot of that comes, I just got a referral from a judge out in Grand Rapids who I had a trial in front of 4 years ago. Well, it was before Flint, so it had to be, 6, 7 years ago. And he referred me a case. So
reputation,
right? Yeah. So I tell young attorneys all the time that I've worked over 25 years to build a reputation. Integrity is everything. Honesty is everything. Preparation is everything. It'll take you 10 seconds for you to lose that in my firm if you ever lie, cheat, or steal in front of a judge, right, or in front of a client or in front of a jury. That is the taboo. So reputation is that of character that you have time in spades. Your character, Dave, is one of honesty, integrity, and you do the things that, keep it in the middle and you can't get in trouble. The same thing, I don't tell clients what they want to hear. I am dreadful for that. People don't like to hear that, but I tell them, hey, listen, this is not I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. This is not a case that I think is appropriate nor can win, or, you may feel an injustice occurred or think that, but let me explain to you. And I tell people, what the facts are that I believe. Doesn't mean that I'm right. They have the right to go through someone else, but I have that reputation. I try to 1,000% of the time, all the time, is follow those simple rules that, do unto others as you would have done to you, and hit it down the middle, and you can't get in trouble. That's the key, I think, of simple fundamentals in every business. And I study a lot of businesses, and I think that's, those principles are really important.
Well, it's worked for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate this time, the insight on the Crumbley, the Flint, and just the law profession and the work that you do. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you, my man.
Great to see you.
As
Todd
always.
Flood, Managing Partner, Flood Law, joining us today on the Dave LewAllen Podcast. As always, we thank producer, director Josh Bowron, certainly to you for listening and watching on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all your favorite places for podcasts. We certainly hope that you'll subscribe and listen often as we bring you interesting guests like Todd Flood today. In the meantime, stay safe, have a great day, be kind.